And now, the survival show which once survived watching two pigs fight under a spandex blanket with our friends Wren and Shiner Bach. In this episode, we welcome back author Devon Porter. But today, we won't be discussing dystopian fiction. Instead, he shares with us all the delicious goodness that is growing your own bacon and becoming a pig farmer. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 184. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole. Safe and sound. Devon, welcome back to In the Rabbit Hole.
Thanks for having me.
I guess I'm sure we'll end up talking about an apocalypse in some shape or form on the show today, but today we're actually going to talk about pig farming, which is cool because I've never talked about pig farming. I know nothing about pig farming. All I know is about sweet, 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 wonderful bacon. Let's start with, why would a prepper or homesteader choose pigs as the livestock they want to raise? Because my only experience is with chickens and rabbits.
Right. And, a lot of the preppers and the homesteaders would, start looking into livestock. You start with your garden, you learn how to do that, and then you say, okay, now I need some protein. And you start to look at what your starter livestock can be. And, you mentioned rabbits and chickens. You can do those very easily. But when you start to graduate into the larger kinds of livestock, you don't have all that many choices. You basically have pigs, cows, goats, and sheep are your four main sort of mainstream types of livestock. And goats, they're very easy to raise. They'll eat anything, but it's hard to make money off of goats. The meat for goats is a very specialized kind of product. There's not a lot of people that eat goat meat.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to create the goat cheese, you have to milk those things every morning, which is a heck of a lot of work. And, I think that, to go that route and say, okay, I'm going to make goat cheese and sell it, you are going to have the FDA and Uncle Sam living right next to you. I mean, when you start producing things like cheese and dairy, you really have a lot of regulations and hoops to jump through and things like that. So, and then you look at sheep and you say, okay, well, you have to shear them if you want to make some money. You got to make the product that comes from, their coats. And mutton and things like that really doesn't sell very well. Again, it's kind of like goat. It's a very specialized kind of meat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, cows, that's what we all think of. But for your starting prepper, and kind of what I'm thinking here is somebody who has between a half an acre and about 4 or 5 acres to work with. Cows are difficult because you need a ton of space. And it's difficult to move a cow. You hear about cattle prods. In fact, it's so difficult to move cows that we used to have a profession that was dedicated to it. Cowboys. That's all they did. All day long was move cows around. And you've got chutes, and you've got a lot of these different very sort of high-end types of equipment and infrastructure that you need. So what I did was I tried the meat birds, and that's a very gross thing, to be honest with you. The first 20 meat birds that I slaughtered, I didn't eat chicken for a month after that. And it can be done. You can make money with it. But that's unfortunately the drawback, is that you got to kill each single one and take it to market. Rabbits are actually fairly effective, and you can produce a lot of protein with that. But, again, rabbit is a fairly limited market for meat, and they're fairly small.
Mm-hmm.
So what I ended up with was pigs, and I think some of the advantages with pigs for a prepper is you can feed them your trash. Everybody knows they'll eat anything, and I had a conversation with a friend of mine a few years ago, and I said, there's a particular kind of nut that falls in the forest. And I'm wondering, I said, do you think that the pigs will eat this? And he had a lot of experience with pig farming. And he looked at me and he says, Devon, they're pigs, So I always remember that. Pretty much everything that I have ever fed them, they have eaten. So they're pretty effective for that reason. And the other nice thing about pigs is that they're easy to move. If you show up with a Twinkie, a pig will follow you to the moon. These things are so food-driven that we have never had to really use our muscles to move a pig. We can get them in cages. We can get them into different places just using food sort of as a draw for them. So I found that was one of the more logical choices for a prepper. And we'll get to this shortly, but there's a few small breeds that I will recommend that are great for starting out, for homesteaders and preppers with a fairly small amount of land. There's a few smaller breeds of pig that are very doable and, something that you can sort of use to learn and grow from there. But I think that's some of the advantages to raising hogs or pigs over a lot of the different type of mainstream livestock choices that you have.
Okay. And I would say, after my experience with rabbits, while I enjoyed rabbits once in a while, and I'm actually someone who my family and my wife often tease me, I would just give Aaron cardboard. He'll eat anything. He doesn't care for me, like I do enjoy really good food, but for me, often I'm in such a rush. Food is just fuel. Like I got to get on to the next thing. And so it's actually very difficult for me to get tired. Like I'll eat the same thing every day. I don't care. Just, I just got to get it. I just got to get that task done.
Right.
Rabbits, I actually did get very sick of eating rabbit. It's not something I found easy to eat often.
Right. It has an unusual flavor that, people say it tastes like chicken. Of course, everything
tastes like chicken because, the Matrix couldn't figure out what to make it taste like.
Right, exactly. So, but yeah, I would agree with that. The French can cook anything, and certain French rabbit stews and things like that are particularly amazing. But I mean, the French can make a snail taste good. So
exactly.
That's not really a very good example.
You smother anything in enough cream or garlic butter, and it'll be amazing.
Right. So, but everybody loves bacon, and I've been raising pork for going on 8 years now, and I have never once said, "Oh, I'm so tired of all this bacon. Oh, geez, I don't want to have bacon again." I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. So, I think that it's a nice variety, too, in that, you've got the pork chops and the bacon and sausage and all these different things. So, for a prepper to fill your freezer with a pig a year, just amazing. Unbelievable source of protein.
So, we'll get to breeds in a second, but just out of curiosity, since you already said putting a pig in a freezer, how many pounds of meat do you actually end up getting out of, say, the average pig that the average person is going to raise?
For your listeners, and for what we are going to talk about today, I think that your average prepper that's going to be growing one of the breeds that I recommend and is going to be starting out, I think your first pig, probably your first 5, you can expect between 100 and 150 pounds of finished pork off of your average pig. Now, of course, your industrial farmers, their pig is 400 pounds finished.
Yeah.
And that means that, you're just getting the actual pork and none of the actual bone and the leftover stuff. But I think that that's a pretty good number to go by for your sort of starting prepper homesteader, because that's still a fairly easy to handle size. And to have 100 pounds of finished pork, you had about 140, 150 pound pig. And it sort of works like that. It tends to be between a 2/3 and a 3/4 ratio of the weight of the actual entire pig versus the amount of pork that you get back. So, and as you get better at it, your pigs start to get bigger and bigger. And some of the things that I'm going to tell you today took me years to learn and years to figure out the tricks and the trade of all that. So I think if your listener listens to this today, by the end of it, within a year, they could be getting every single pig, 100 pounds of pork or more, I think easily.
Okay. That's a pretty decent amount of meat.
Right.
Yeah. So which breed of pig have you tried already? And then we'll get to which pig you ended up with.
Right. I have raised 3 different kinds of pigs. And the first breed that I raised was called the Duroc, Duroc. And it's actually a beautiful pig. It's the same color as an Irish setter, sort of that nice red auburn kind of color. Mm-hmm. And Durocs are a pretty large breed, and I sort of fell into it and realized fairly quickly that this breed was not for me. The thing about some of these breeds of pigs that are very common, the Duroc and the American pig, that's like your pig from Charlotte's Web. That's just your standard pink, big old American pig.
Okay.
Those 2 breeds in particular, but a lot of these well-known breeds have unfortunately become industrialized. And what I mean by that is that they have been bred for a very specific purpose over the last few decades. And that purpose is to sit in a feedlot and get hugely fat. For the mothers, when they have their piglets, they're in farrowing cages, which prevent the mother from laying down. So they have basically bred out the motherhood gene. So with the Durocs, my average litter with one of these Duroc mothers would be 6 or 7 piglets. And at the end of the day, after about 2 weeks, I would have about 3 left. They were not particularly good mothers. And one of the main ways that a sow will kill her piglets is just by laying on them. And they don't know. They don't hear the squeal. And, I saw that a lot with the Durocs. So that sort of started to make me look more deeply into these breeds. The second breed that I had experience with, and in fact, this is going to be one of the breeds that I recommend, was called the Kune Kune. And that's an interesting spelling. It's Kune, Kune. It's the only breed of pig that comes from New Zealand, of all places. And it's a neat-looking breed. They have spots, but they're about the size of a pot-bellied pig. So I phased out the Durocs, and I started in with the Kune Kunes, and I raised those for quite a while and did very well with them. The Kune Kunes are one of the three breeds that I'll recommend for your starting prepper. You know, it's a very effective pig. It's a great little meat pig. Some of the best bacon that I've ever had. Yeah, the drawback with the Kunes, one, is that they're cute. So, you know, you get a little attached to them, and you get through that. And it's the circle of life. And if you're going to be raising livestock, you need to understand that, one, these breeds would not exist if we did not raise them. And two, everything in nature experiences what well-raised livestock experiences. You know, my pigs, they're born, they have wonderful early life, they have the grass under their feet and the sun on their backs, and they're allowed to be pigs, and then when it is their time, it's very quick and very humane. So, but the Kunes, you know, they're a little cute, you know, so it took me a little while to get through that, but the Kunes, I think, are very good, and eventually I realized that I was getting better at this and that I could start to look into other breeds. So for years I've been hearing these whispers on the wind, and people would say, have you ever heard of Mangalitsa's? That is the most amazing pork that you've ever had. It's the most rare pig that you can ever imagine. The Mangalitsa, you know, and I would sort of go, wow, what is that? You know, and I started doing research. It took me 2 years to find a reasonably priced breeding group of Mangalitsa's. And I actually found it right in my backyard, and it was a guy who was a play farmer. You know, he owned a chain of nursing homes, and I didn't need to make money off of his farm, and he raised Mangalitsa's just because he liked the meat, you know. So I finally was able to get some, and in fact, I traded him some Kunes. And the Mangalitsa is what I've been raising for the last 3 years. And in fact, today, my first finished Mangalitsa went to a very fancy restaurant, and I will get a nice big check for that. So that's sort of the culmination of that process. But they call the Mangalitsa the Kobe beef of pork. It's really true. You look at a pork chop from a Mangalitsa versus a pork chop from, you know, any other kind of pig, really. A pork chop tends to be a light color. You know, they call it the other white meat. It almost looks a little like chicken, but a little more pink. Now, if you look at a piece of a Mangalitsa pork chop, it's dark red. It looks like a piece of beef, and it's got the fat marbled through it, just like Kobe beef. And the taste is really amazing. One of the drawbacks for the Mangalitsa is that they take 18 months to mature, whereas your average, you know, your white American pig takes about 10 months. Your Duroc takes about 11 or 12 months to mature. So they're a little bit longer maturing, but you gain that reward in the meat. And I have a good friend who also raises pigs, and I know some other people, so I have some experience with other breeds as well. But those are the three that I've done so far.
So why was this pig so difficult for you to find if so many people salivate at the opportunity to have one, it sounds like?
You know, it's actually fascinating because what's interesting about the evolution of how Americans have eaten food over the last, 50, 100 years, one of the results of that evolution has been that we wanted leaner and leaner pork. The lard pigs, and there's a few breeds besides the Mangalitsa, but the Mangalitsa would be known as one of the lard pig breeds. They went out of fashion because we had Crisco, we had olive oil, we had, all the vegetable oils. We did not need this lard. So you wanted a leaner and leaner pig because you could sell the pork chops for more than you could sell the sausage and the fat. So breeds like the Mangalitsa fell into disfavor by the 20s and 30s. And the Mangalitsa originally was a Hungarian breed. By the time we reached about 1950, there was only about 40 of them left in Hungary. And the Hungarian Historical Preservation Society said, this is an amazing breed that belongs to Hungary. This is part of our heritage. And they decided that they were going to save the breed. And the 40 pigs that were left were like two different farmers who lived down the road from each other. And just kept raising Mangalitsa's. They forgot that, the modern world was even happening. So we saw a resurgence in Hungary in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And the first Mangalitsa didn't make it to the U.S. until actually after the year 2000. So what has happened is that it's slowly spreading, and I would like to think that I'm actually playing a part in that I will sell piglets and I will sell uncut boars to people who want to raise pigs. Where the Mangalitsa was almost like a fancy breed of dog for a while, and they held it closely. And if you wanted to buy a boar that was not cut, you would be paying thousands of dollars. So it prevented the breed from spreading as much as I believe that it should have, because 2004, 2005 chefs discovered that lard tasted better than anything. They remembered that.
So to back up for just a second, by an uncut boar, you mean a boar that has not been neutered, I assume?
Right, still got his balls.
Got it. Good. Okay.
I would say that is sort of the whole thing that really drew me to that. And part of that had to do with the different models that there are. And we'll talk about that, where to sell it a little bit later. But the fact that you can take an entire pig and sell it at a premium to a restaurant, not have to cut it up, is very attractive, for a lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would imagine. Let's take a quick break. Listeners, the show is going to go on a brief 2-week break. There will be 2 episodes rebroadcast during that time from the archives. So you're going to hear some ITRH classics I think you'll enjoy. I've got 2 things going on. One is a major project that is eating into more time than I expected. And the other thing is my birthday is coming up. So there's that. And, shenanigans. So there. And, of course, never forget to consider joining the ITRH Armada. Hey, listener, do you get at least $3 of value out of ITRH every month? Well, you should see what we give to the Armada members. Check it out today by visiting itrh.net. Members get access to episodes a day early. And when you join, you'll receive an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat about survival with myself and other Armada members all day long. Get a free copy of the book, Owning Your Survival, so you can have a plan and do it right. Access to our famous Bob and emergency kits on-demand class. Make that perfect bag. Learn what to obsess over and, more importantly, what not to obsess over. Our insane ammo inventory spreadsheet. You'll finally have instant access to knowing what you've got on hand at any time. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH, including one with a famous knife maker, which was never aired. And that's just to name a few things. Remember to visit itrh.net to get more benefit and help the show stay safe and sound, which helps you stay safe and sound. Now, back to today's guest. What goes into the care and feeding of these animals? Like with rabbits, is fairly straightforward. You go buy your rabbit pellet, you make sure it's got about the right ratios, you find a good brand you like. Other than that, you give them water, you give them some alfalfa maybe here and there, and some other things on occasions. But for the most part, it's not that complicated. You get a good cage, you clean up after them. That's about all there is to it, beyond just breeding them. What's it like with pigs?
It's simpler than you might think. And one of the things that we can get out of the way fairly early that is another problem that you will have with trying to raise cattle is that cattle periodically will need inoculations for various things. Different types of worms, different types of things that'll go in their feet, things like that. And it seems like some of these cattle farmers are giving them shots all the time, So now certain pig farmers, and of course I think that this is cheating, but certain pig farmers will, at 12 weeks of age, they will give the pig a shot of what is called ivermectin, which is basically an antibiotic. And at 150 pounds, they will give them a second shot of ivermectin. So, for those who are willing to go that route, that's about when you would want to do it. It's the only 2 times in a pig's life when you would give it any type of shot like that. You would do it for those, like I said, for those who want to try it, you would do it in the neck, and you would not do it in the butt, because if you do it in the butt, it actually causes a blemish in the meat. Now, having said that, I've been raising pork for 8 years, and I've never used ivermectin. So for that purpose, they're pretty tough, and there's not a lot of care necessary on that side. Mainly what these people are doing is they're fattening them up. They're not trying to keep them from dying from worms or whatever the case may be. You do want to keep them on a fairly large amount of space. I would say about a quarter acre per pig, maybe an eighth. And with cattle, you're looking at about an acre and a half per cow. So you can fit a lot on a smaller space. Now, you know this from rabbits and chickens, but for a small farmer, if you smell ammonia, you have a problem. If you smell ammonia, something is going to die. So you need to address that. You need to use lime or something like that. But I keep mine and I rotate them between a couple of different fields, and they treat the fields fairly well, and it has kept them healthy, this whole time. So, that side of the care and feeding, I think can start us out. And fencing can be very interesting. What you can find is that you can modify a lot of existing fencing into something that will work for pig fencing. Some people use the solar-powered electric fence. Mm-hmm. I personally do not use that because I'm fairly absent-minded, and I don't need to be tasing myself a couple times a month. So, I try to stay away from that. But what I have done personally is I'm out in Virginia, and we have a lot of that 3- and 4-board wooden fence. A lot of people are in Virginia, Kentucky, horse country, they're familiar with that kind of fence. All I did was I got that nice thick federal wire. It's just a step up from chicken wire, and I dug a small trench about 6 inches into the ground underneath the fence row, stuck that federal wire down there, filled the dirt back up, and stapled the federal wire to the wood of that fence, and that has worked pretty well. Small pigs can be like Houdini. It's interesting that you say, wow, these things are escape artists. So the main thing that they're going to try to do is to get underneath stuff. They're not diggers, but if they find a spot that they can squeeze through, they will. So, fencing is something that you want to pay attention to. And then for those who are really on the ball, electric fence works great. Pigs are smart, and all they got to do is touch that thing one time, and they will be very careful and not do it after that. So that brings us to water, and then we'll talk about feed. But the water is kind of fun to watch with pigs. What you really want to do is have an automatic watering system, and you could get a heavy-duty one online for $100, $150. And what it's going to do is that you'll actually plant that thing in the ground, and it'll be hooked to a hose that has a constant stream. And when they put their little nose in there, it flips a switch, and the water comes out. That is your ultimate way to do water for pigs.
Okay.
But, for those who don't want to get into that, you could just give them a water trough. The fun thing is that pigs love to get in water. So if any kind of trough that you get them, it'll be beautiful that morning. You fill it up, and it's just this fresh, clear water for them to drink out of. You go back at noon, and there's a quarter of it left, and it's filled with mud. The pigs have all jumped in it and, switched around. Mm. That's something that it's not the end of the world, but it's something that I got used to, until I moved to the automatic watering. And, so that can work fairly well. And, of course, that brings us to feed. And what do you feed them? Of course, you go to Tractor Supply, you go to your typical feed type stores, and you buy these big 50-pound bags of feed. And, it's typically going to be $14, $16 per bag, which starts to add up. And of course, when you're starting out, that's fine. You go through a couple bags a week. It's no big deal. But as you start to ratchet up, what you want to look for is a brewery. You want to find a brewery that is in your area. Breweries use grain I'm not exactly sure what they do, but I know that they soak this stuff in water, and it somehow creates what will become the beer. What I do know is that when they are finished with that grain, they have to get rid of it. Brewer's grain is what it's called, and it's about between 25 and 30% protein, depending on what kind of grain they're using.
Yeah, that's pretty. That's actually a pretty high percentage rate.
Right. So you don't want to feed them 100% brewer's grain because there's vitamins and minerals that they will miss. Mm. So you need to mix that with your store-bought feed, probably 25% store-bought, 75% brewer's grain. And the breweries cannot get rid of this stuff fast enough. So you're looking at $50, for a pallet of the stuff, a couple thousand pounds. Mm. And it will come to you wet. And it's, like I said, it's pretty high in protein, but it's pretty low in everything else. So you want to mix it with something. And oftentimes I will put molasses on it. Molasses is cheap, and it will make the meat faster, which is a good thing. But I think that's your main basis, and when you're starting, you're thinking about where to put them, what to feed them, and all that type of thing.
Okay. What about, like, wallows? Because, as much as I know about pigs is what I've seen in movies. So do they need, like, a big mud pit to roll around in, or what is that all about?
Right. Pigs do not have sweat glands.
Okay.
So they will naturally gravitate towards mud in the hot months, which luckily is not the whole year. So about 4 months out of the year, you're going to want to try to create a wallow for them and potentially some shade by a tree or two, or, a little indoor place where they can go. I have a little stall in the barn that they sleep in at night, and during the heat of the day, either they'll go to their wallow or they will go inside and just sit where it's shady. So what you want to find is like a dip in the ground, and you just hit it with the hose 2 or 3 times a week. And that will be their wallow through June, July, August. And by September, you don't need it anymore. So that's really the months that you need it. If you're lucky enough to have a little stream or a creek, they will make their own, somewhere over in that area, and that will work out pretty well too. But you're absolutely right. That's something that you need to think about.
So with the stream or the creek, do you have to be careful that they don't then end up contaminating that stream or creek?
I've actually had that question before, and I have a field that has a pond in it, a beautiful pond. And it appears to me that the jury is still out on that. I have not put my pigs in that field yet. I had someone tell me, who was one of these old-time sort of farmer guys, that had this sort of almanac-type knowledge, that it could potentially spread the rhinovirus. But what he said was that moving water is much less of a concern than standing water. So if it's a stream that moves periodically, you don't have to worry about it. But if it is a standing piece of water, one, they may get caught in there and get in the mud, and they may actually drown. But two, they may actually contaminate that. So You're absolutely right. Yeah, that is a concern. But from what I understand, a small little bit of standing water will not create an issue.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking like maybe their feces or whatever getting into the stream, and I don't know, passing.
Right, and I think I said that wrong. A little bit of moving water will not be an issue. Standing water, yes, you do not want to have them exactly contaminating standing water.
Okay. So what about people who have, like we've talked about the amount of space that these are in, and I'm guessing that most people actually rotate so that they don't like totally destroy the land like you would do with cattle, or you would do with chickens or any of these other things. Do you have to do that with pigs?
You should, but you don't. You don't actually have to, and there's two ways that you can get around it. One, you can give them antibiotics, which is the industrial way, and they stay in these, sort of fecal, pools, so to speak, but they give them enough antibiotics that it will not make them sick. The other way that you can do it, and I do this once a year, even though I probably don't have to, I give them a slurry of 3 different things. I get minced garlic, rosemary, which I chop up fairly fine, about the size of a quarter, and mix it with some type of a cheap jelly, like grape jelly or something like that. And what you end up with is something that looks very gross to you and me. You've got this mix of grape jelly and garlic.
That seems kind of disgusting.
But the pigs love it, and what it does is the garlic and the rosemary act together as a dewormer, and your biggest problem is going to be, worms, basically. And if you give them this once every 6 months, once every year, you can get away with leaving them on the same piece of land for a lot longer. So actually my breeding herd does not move, and, they periodically some of them will get cycled out to different places, but I continually use one particular field. The other thing that you can do is you periodically can buy these bags of lime pellets, and what that does is it reduces the pH. It'll reduce the smell. So a couple times a year you can get these lime pellets and throw them out like you would grass seed onto your field, and it won't particularly, won't harm the pigs. And within 24 hours it'll smell better, and it will reduce a lot of the bacteria, worms, and things like that are in your field. So, with pigs you can get away with it. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is worth addressing is how much do they destroy the field? The answer is that it can vary depending on the breed of pig. One thing that I really like about the Mangalitsa, and the breeds that I will recommend all are like this, is that the Mangalitsas do not root a whole lot once they get past about 20 weeks old. They get really fat and kind of lazy, and they don't really root. Now, the Durocs, on the other hand, would not stop rooting. When I had 3 Durocs in about a 2-acre field, it looked like Vietnam. I mean, this thing was just torn to shreds, big holes everywhere. A lot of people don't like the way that looks. So the three breeds that I will recommend are, none of them are known as really strong rooters. The other thing, and I think this is not particularly humane, but some farmers will do it. You probably heard about the pig with the ring through its nose. The reason they do that is so that the pigs will not root. Pigs like to be pigs, and, any breed of pig will root a little bit, but I'm not particularly a fan of that, but that is something that you could consider doing if you want to prevent them from rooting.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's interesting. So moving on to the business end of this, we had considered trying to balance out the rabbit cost, the cost of our rabbit project with actually selling some. And we had a couple of different shops in town, feed shops in town, that were asking to buy our rabbits. And we were kind of right there on the cusp where it was like, we actually do have too many rabbits, and it would be a good idea we have more than we want to eat. And so it would work for us to start selling them before we had a pack of feral dogs come in and basically destroy our entire rabbit and chicken crop. But so but what was always curious to me is like that break even point where it makes sense to sell them. And how do you determine price and stuff like that. So let's go in there and just start with the simple question of how do you sell pork? How do you sell a pig?
Right. And that's a great point. And your issue with the rabbits is step 2, because we talk about sustainability. We talk about wanting to be a prepper, wanting to be a homesteader, and you want to be a little bit less dependent on the grid. So that's the first step. You say, okay, I raised enough rabbit or I raised enough pork that now I have enough to eat. And now I want to take the next step of sustainability, which is, something to come in and help me pay my bills a little bit, help me pay for the cost of this land that I have, and a lot of people are, they got 4 or 5 acres and they're going, okay, I got to pay property tax on this land. It would be nice to make some money off of it. So the first step when you say, okay, I want to sell my pork, is you find a local meat processor. If you Google butchers, you're going to get a lot of hipster kind of places that sell, hipster meats and stuff like that, which is great. I love those butchers. You can pay $90 for a pound of, ground beef.
Does it have a man bun or what are they putting on?
Well, right. I mean, you work at this place, you're required to have a man bun and a wispy beard. If you have a full beard, no, unfortunately, we will not let you work.
That's too much testosterone. No, sorry. That's not allowed anymore.
No, too much of that, So now you want to look for a meat processor in your area, and you want to find one. I'm in Virginia, and close to me there's a little town called Front Royal, Virginia, and there's a meat processor called Blue Ridge Meats. And I don't know how much they process, but the whole place is probably less than 10,000 square feet. So that'll give you a sense that some of these industrial, whatever the meat processor is that processes for McDonald's is 500,000 square feet. So we're talking about one of the smaller ones. You want to find a small one because 1, it's humane. They do a better job. 2, they're going to treat you better. And 3, it's probably going to be a little bit cheaper to do individual ones. A lot of these large ones will discourage small providers to go to them by charging a lot for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then drastically reducing the price for volume. So they don't want the small farmers to come to them. So if you're in Virginia, Gore's, which is in Edinburgh, Blue Ridge Meats, which is in Front Royal. Those are 2 good places. But you want to Google that. You want to find a processor, and unfortunately they need to be FDA inspected, as the machine requires these days. So your first step is going to be, and this is actually kind of fun. It can get you to know your community and all of that. But you get yourself a booth at your local farmer's market, and you go to a nice meat processor, and you fill out what's called a cut sheet. And the cut sheet is going to say, okay, I'm sending you a pig. You're gonna slaughter it for me, and you're going to give me back a cooler full of meat. And that meat is going to be vacuum sealed, frozen. It's going to be labeled with the net weight. It's going to have the ingredients if it is sausage or anything other than just pure, pork chops or bacon or whatever. And it's going to say the name of the processor, and it's going to have a nice little brand or a seal on there that says FDA inspected, which is what you need. So at that point, you get your cooler full of meat, and you go to the farmer's market and you start selling it. For home-raised, pasture-raised meat, and of course we don't use the organic word because you have, again, Uncle Sam right in your bedroom looking at you for years, making sure that you can use that word. So you just say all natural, naturally raised. Typically, you're going to get between $6 and $8 a pound for sausage. For bacon, you're going to get maybe 10. And of course, this is really something that can vary wildly depending on where you are. If you're in Mississippi, the price would be very different than if you're in New York City, obviously. But I think your middle of the road market, that's kind of what you can look for. Pork chops, about maybe $8 a pound. If you're in Manhattan, you can $20 a pound. You can get easily. So that's the way to start. But that is not really the end game if you want to be sustainable. There's a couple of drawbacks with the farmer's market. One is that it can be very taxing to do it years at a time. It's going to be 1 day a week. You're going to be sitting out there in the sun for 5 or 6 hours every single Sunday, every single Saturday. Some days you'll make a lot of money. Some days you won't. It'll burn you out eventually. But to do it for a year or 2 is a lot of fun because you will meet local farmers, you will meet local consumers, and then you can start to move into your larger model, which is what I've been doing lately. At a certain point, you say, okay, now I can produce an entire pig once a month. And if I could do that maybe once every 2 months, if I can do that, I can go to a restaurant and say, I can be your main pork provider. And you can do that hippie, touchy-feely thing that restaurants love to do and say locally produced pork, and on the menu, it looks great. And the reality of it is the pork is better. It tastes better. It cooks better. It's really better pretty much in every single way you can think of. So at that point, you're going to charge the restaurant hanging weight So it changes your model a little bit, because now you're taking a 200-pound pig and you're getting a hanging pig instead of a processed pig. And what the difference is between that is that you take a 200-pound pig and you say, I want sausage and pork chops and all this kind of stuff out there. They do it. They put it in the little packs for you and they give it to you. But now you only have 150 pounds of pork. The head and the feet and the cheeks and all this kind of stuff went in the trash. When you're talking about hanging weight, you take that same 200-pound pig, and now your hanging pig weighs 180 pounds. It's just missing the guts and the skin, pretty much. And the restaurant pays you per pound. So again, it can vary wildly, depending on markets, but you're looking to sell a restaurant between $5 and $10 per pound for hanging weight, depending on what kind of pig it is and how in demand it is, and all that kind of thing. So I think that's pretty much the end game for reaching a sustainability at the point where not only are you breaking even and you're producing pork for yourself, but you're actually making a little bit of money. If you find a source for brewer's grain, it really reduces your feed cost, and it'll take you a little while to build it to get your herd up to the point that you want it. But once you get to that point, you can start producing them regularly. You will have more money coming in than is going out on a fairly significant difference.
Oh, wow.
So that's ultimately what I think you want to go for.
See, that's pretty cool. And I think the trouble we ran into with the rabbits was they're small. You've got to deal with a lot of them to really get anywhere. I mean, for us, we weren't really being approached for them. For me, we were being approached by feed stores that really wanted to sell pet rabbits. And ultimately really, I mean, other than, torture and nastiness like that, we really didn't care what people did with these goofy rabbits.
Right.
But and I think all in all, it took us, it was about the same amount of time. I think it was about 2 or 3 years before we were at the point where it was like, man, we got to do something about these rabbits. Like, we got too many rabbits and I ain't eating that much rabbit. So let's turn these little guys into some money to feed our other little guys. So,
Right. And you think to get 200 pounds of rabbit, you got to kill a lot of rabbits, but to get 200 pounds of pork, you kill one pig, so it changes that. 200
pounds of rabbit, man, that's man, off the cuff. That's 2 people doing an okay job at doing it regular, at some speed. Man, you're talking at least all day, maybe a day and a half to process that much rabbit.
Right. And, this actually makes me think of something is that, it's actually fairly easy to slaughter a pig. Do it yourself and actually cut it up. And you need to keep your knife very sharp. You need to watch a YouTube video, which you got to love YouTube.
Yeah.
There's plenty of videos that'll show you how to do that. That's something that you can learn how to do. And for your own meat and for your own purposes, you do not need to pay the butcher to do it for you. You can make your own sausage and all that. And, to do one 200-pound pig, you're probably looking at about 4 to 5 hours.
Okay.
So it's something that wouldn't take you as long as, and that's what, when you were talking about the rabbit, that's what made me think of it.
Yeah. And with the difference with rabbit, it's just, you're going through, like with a pig, it's like, it's one instance where you're making the initial incision and maybe removing the hide and doing that. With rabbits, that's, like 50 rabbits. You're sitting there like removing the hide and everything else and removing the guts. And it's,
you'll love this there. And I had a tree hugger guy, and this was the ultimate tree hugger. I mean, this guy was, just off the charts. And he was the one who taught me how to slaughter meat birds and, to do it correctly. And I love the guy. I don't want to, try to sound like I'm making fun of him. I actually really like this guy. But every meat bird that we slaughtered, he said some type of a poem that, said something like, back to the earth and the sand will fall through the wind, all this kind of stuff. So, and I'm sitting there going, oh, man, we're going to have to do this for every one of them. And we did. We did about 20 that day. So imagine if you had to do that for every rabbit, you would be in real trouble.
Yeah. I think, in full disclosure, I do apologize to all animals before I end them. But yeah, I'm not reading poetry to them before they go.
Right, as do I. I say thank you for your
exactly.
service.
I like that. Yes.
And I think that they get the point. But this guy really had it down. He had a whole thing. So, and I respect that. But I think it was sort of, it was a little bit humorous too. Is that it can really add up.
Yeah, that's with 200 rabbits. That's a lot of poetry jams right there.
Right. Really is,
So to circle back for just a second to something you were talking about, as far as like hanging weight and this 200-pound animal, how do you end up transporting that? Or does the processor, or do you just say, hey, Mr. Chef, go pick up your own pig carcass from this processor? Or do you have to, like, I don't know, put down a tarp in the trunk of your Volvo and have the not that you necessarily drive a Volvo, I'm just for alliteration here.
Right.
Throw it in the back of your vehicle and then drag it over there. How does that work? Because that's a lot of animal. That's a lot of weight to pick up and maneuver.
Right. And that's a great question. Because it's not like moving a cooler full of 1 pound packs of sauces, because you can break it up. It's a lot easier. And the other problem is that you're going to put these pigs in coolers and you're going to put ice to keep them cold on the trip to take it from the butcher to the restaurant. Restaurants eventually, as you develop the relationship, can start to do their own pickups. But in the beginning, you're sort of taking them to the dance, so to speak. So you want to treat them really well. So for the one that I just did earlier today, they cut the pig down the middle, which made it, half the weight. And it also makes it easier for the chef to cut pork chops. I don't understand exactly why that is, but the chef agreed and the guy at the slaughterhouse agreed that made it easier to get the pork chops out. So that made it a lot easier to move. And I have those big white coolers, the big double wide coolers that you'll use for parties and stuff. They barely will fit in that. You get a couple bags of ice, you put it on top, and you shut it, and then you drive straight to the place. I had the AC on, and I was all worried, but when I got there, I opened the cooler. None of the ice had even melted. And it's a pretty hot day. I mean, it's in VA. It's 92, 93 degrees today. So logistically, that's a great question. And most restaurants will love to get a full pig that is cut right down the middle. So that's going to make it a lot easier, but you're still going to need 2 guys. My farm manager came with me. Each one of us had to get a side of these 2, pretty big coolers. And we just brought them right into the little back entrance of the restaurant. And it was interesting because, this Mangalitsa pork really is very exceptional. And the entire kitchen staff was looking at it, just going, oh, look at that fat. It was kind of neat for me as the pig farmer, and I know that this restaurant can cook my pork better than I ever could. So at some point I'm going to go back and try some of the items on the menu, that they're using it for. So I think that'll be kind of neat. But, logistically, you want to cut it down the middle and put it in a big old cooler, and you're going to need a couple guys for once you get to a decent size. Anyway.
Okay. And I guess to circle back to something else, to kind of round things out, there are a few things that I probably should have asked you about earlier as far as with rabbits, we have to keep the boys separate. Otherwise they'll be a little hard on the girls.
Right.
So,
well, that phrase "breed like rabbits."
Yeah,
it comes from a very solid place in reality.
Exactly. So with the boys, we just kept them separate, and if you got too many boys, well, you just start by culling the boys. But with pigs, so how does that work exactly?
Right. You have a different strategy with male pigs. If you are breeding, which I am, and I think some of your homesteaders are probably not going to worry about that at first. I think, some of your homesteaders are going to want, and shortly I'll probably give the name of the different breeds that I recommend, but they can start with a couple of females, raise them up, slaughter them, and do it again, and that's sort of a good way to get in. But once you start to breed and you start to end up with more boars than you need, you are going to want to cut them fairly early. And the reason you want to do that is that it's going to be like roosters in the sense that they will fight. You want, you want one rooster to every between 6 and 8 hens. And it's about the same ratio for pigs when it comes to boars and sows. You want about 1 boar for every 6 to 8 sows.
Okay.
And if you have any less than or any more than that, there will be conflict, and it will annoy you because you'll be sitting there and you'll hear, these boars will be fighting, and all of that. So when you cut them, that prevents that problem from happening. And what you create when you cut a boar is you create like a steer. The meat's going to be very good because the meat from a boar who has not been cut is going to be very tough. It's full of testosterone. It's not particularly something you want to sell or something you want to, take to a restaurant. You can certainly eat it yourself. You can make decent sausage out of it. But if you cut the boar, it's going to be the best meat that you can ever get, and it's going to get bigger than a sow because it's still male. So the rule for cutting boars is, then of course, YouTube, that's what you do. But you hold them upside down by the 2 hind legs. You spread out their hind legs. You get a scalpel and some iodine, and you go from there. So, and the rest I will let YouTube show you. But you can imagine, how it goes from there. They recover very quickly. The younger that you do it, the more quickly they recover. You do not want to do it and let them be with an actual cut boar for about a day or two. So you want to sequester the boars that you just cut for about 48 hours if they're going to go out into a herd that has a large boar, because the large boar might sense weakness and go after.
Okay.
But beyond that, 10 days old and after is when you can cut a little baby boar. And they're very small at about 10. I normally do it about 2 weeks. They're still very small, easy to handle, and they recover within 24 hours.
Oh, that's interesting. So
that creates a very nice meat pig that you will be able to use.
So that's interesting. So their junk is really on display right away, whereas with rabbits, like, you're kind of waiting to find out who's a boy and who's a girl.
Right. You can tell pretty early, and that's why, if you tried to do it at 8 days, you would have a hard time finding it, which is why I tend to wait 2 weeks.
Okay.
Because at that point, it's easy to find, very visible, but they're still young enough that they recover very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So what else have we not covered already that people really should know about getting into this?
Right. And I want to give the name of the three breeds.
Oh, right.
Because, I remember when I started this, there's an interesting gap between older farmers and young farmers. There's a generation missing in between, so not a lot of knowledge has been passed. So a lot of the young farmers and your listeners, the young homesteaders and preppers, we're having to learn this stuff from scratch, and we're learning it from books. Sometimes we're lucky enough to find somebody to do it. And I always remember reading, I'm looking at my library right now, I got about 5 books that are just dedicated to raising pigs. And in each book, they say, make sure you do the research on the breed that you get and make sure you get a good breed. And I'm like, yeah, but could you tell me the name? I mean, that's why I want to get a book.
Yeah.
So the Koonie is one that I would recommend for a starter pig. It's an absolutely great pig, easy to handle, docile. The meat is pretty good. It's not as good as Mangalitsa, but it's really very good. The pot-belly pig is another one, and that may surprise some people because people think of the pot-belly pig as a pet. What you'll find is there really is no such thing as a teacup pig. Basically, a teacup pig is a pig that has been starved when it was a baby, and it was not given enough protein, was not allowed to grow into its bones, and they're subject to all sorts of health problems later on. But they ain't supposed to be that small. Pigs are not supposed to be that small. So your typical pot-belly pig, if let grow on its own, will be the same size as a Koonie, which would top out about 250, 300 pounds, and is a nice little meat pig. Pot-belly pigs have the same problem as Koonies, though, in that they're pretty cute, so you got to get into that whole circle of life thing. Do not name them. That is very specific advice that somebody told me. I thought I could get away with it anyway, and did not work out. I named one, and it broke my heart, when we lost it. That's the second one. The third one is one of your other fairly small breeds. It's called the guinea hog. I have a good friend who raises those and has done very well with them, and they're a similar sort of size pig to the Koonie and the potbelly. All three of those breeds are easy to raise, easy to start with, but they will still provide you with enough meat that you're not wasting your time. So, that's, I think the three breeds, the Koonie, the potbellied, and the guinea hog, are the three that you really want to look for. They're fairly cheap. They're not going to be that expensive to get into. The ones that I think you ought to stay away from, and I've mentioned too, is just the good old American pig, which has been overbred. And, it can get big enough that it becomes difficult to deal with. Durocs, I believe, have been overbred. Although, from what I understand, if you look in the right way, the same thing with Angus cattle. An Angus cow is not necessarily an Angus cow. There's different types. There are older breeds of Angus that are smaller and the meat is richer, and Durocs are the same way. The people that have preserved the original Duroc and have not allowed it to become industrialized, those Durocs are still pretty good, and they're a little fattier than the industrial ones. When you're looking for a breed of pig beyond those 5 that I've mentioned, what you want to look at is you want to start to look at the breeder themselves and say, okay, where'd you get them? Where were these from? Did they come from a factory farm? Have you been breeding them for long? And you want to ask a lot of the questions that you've been asking, which is, well, how big can I expect these things to get? How badly do they root? And, of course, it's even better if you can go and look at the fields that they're using, because you can just tell by looking at it. If they were raising industrial Durocs, like I said, it would be a minefield. It would look like moguls on a ski slope, in their backyard. And so you would know, okay, I've got a big rooting pig on my hands. But, I think that's a good start for your typical homesteaders, because I would not recommend getting into one of the larger breeds right away. Because it is. It gets to be a lot to feed. It gets difficult to handle. And it's a lot of spending money on feed, waiting for the things to ramp up. Whereas if you start with a smaller breed, it's a lot easier to do, and it's easier to slaughter for yourself. So those are my 3 recommendations and the 2 ones that I think you might want to stay away from.
Okay. What about, you mentioned you've got some books. Were any of them worth mentioning?
There's one that's called Stories Guide.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Storey. You may be familiar with that series. Yeah. And in fact, I believe that they do one for rabbits.
Yeah, they do.
And that's sort of like an old-timey Foxfire Farmer's Almanac type company that does these things. Any of the pig books that you find, Stories Guide to Raising Pigs is a pretty good one. But any one of these things, to be honest with you, they might even scare your homesteader a little bit, because there'll be a whole chapter on breeding. And it goes, now check the sow and put the sow under a heat lamp and go into the heat lamp and put down a layer of straw. I got some old farm pigs here. I mean, when they have babies, they have their babies in the herd. And I don't go in. I was your helicopter parent the first couple of years. I mean, I would leave these poor things alone, but now it's like, when you have a kid and you have your second kid and, you're a little more lenient, with the second kid. The breeding and the birthing is something that they mostly do on their own. It does not need a lot of involvement if you get a good breed. And the other thing about most of these pig books, including the Stories Guide to Pig, is that they will say, oh, you have to inoculate them. And it'll tell you a lot of things that were more for your industrial farmer than for your prepper homesteader. And that's something that I think your listeners, should keep in mind. And I think it's a great idea to get a couple of books about, raising pork. But keep that in mind, in that they're a little bit aimed in a different direction, and you'll be able to take a lot of that information and make it on a smaller, more sustainable scale.
That's good information. Yeah, what I found about the Stories Guide books is that each one really is its own microcosm. It totally depends on who the author was. Like the rabbit book that I had was great, and it was everything from just the real small-time hobbyist, but there was plenty of information in there for somebody who's going to get really serious about it. Their chicken book, totally different. It was a totally different kind of book. It was a lot. It really felt like it was aimed at the person that wants a pet chicken rather than a meat bird. It was.
I remember that, and they had a whole thing about the silkies.
Yeah.
And, that silly breed of chicken that lays very few eggs, it just looks ridiculous. It's a big plume on the top of its head. I remember that the Stories chicken book had way more on the silky than you would ever imagine for somebody who wanted to raise chicken.
Yeah, and like the silky in a chicken production can be a very powerful tool because they're great brooding birds, terrible layers.
They're so good at that.
But it's like, the book would go on at length about things that it's like, I don't need decorative chickens. I need meat birds. And I need
wasn't there a chapter on showing chickens?
Yeah, I think there was a chapter in the rabbits about showing them too. I mean, and that makes sense. That becomes a big part of all of this usually for the younger or just for the hobbyist. But yeah, I think the chicken book just went. There was too much about the rooster's crow and what it means and what it doesn't mean and what it could or could not mean, and just stuff where you're just like, okay, this is a pet book. This isn't about me eating this poor animal. Yeah, I think from my experience, it was very hit or miss, but that's cool to know about the Pig Stories Guide.
Right. It's the guy's name is Kelly Clover, is the author. Clover, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's he's the one that wrote that stories, and you can tell that he is a little bit of more of an industrial pig farmer, but he's been doing it for a very long time, and you can tell he knows his stuff. So I think that there's some value to getting a copy of that.
Okay. Book. Any other books worth mentioning?
Some of the sort of general livestock books can be pretty helpful, but I'm not thinking of any, off the top of my head, although I suspect that you know this guy very well, Joel Salatin.
Oh, yeah.
He's a very interesting guy to look into, and you can do some stuff for free. He's written about maybe 12, 15 books, but you can get a lot of free stuff off of his website, and he does raise pigs, and he raises a neat sort of fancy breed, kind of like I do. And he can give you a lot of ideas about movement and feeding and things like that. So he does not have any specific pig books, but he has some sort of miscellaneous books that can be very helpful and that do have some information about pigs in them.
Oh, cool. Okay. You brought up something not to do, which, I mean, I can tell you from experience of dealing with any animal, don't name them unless you really want them to be a pet. Ask me how I know. Are there any other real don'ts when it comes to either pigs in general or a breed that you're like, do not go get this breed?
Those are the only two breeds that I've had, particular personal experience with. The only thing that I can sort of think of is that you don't want to let one of your boars get too old. I think your top age for a boar is about 3 years. Your top age for a sow is going to be 4 or 5. You don't want to have more than 4 litters out of a sow. The litters start to get smaller. It starts to tire the poor girl out. And most of the breeds of pigs, their boars will start to grow tusks. And if you let it get between 3, 4, 5 years old, it could start to turn on you, and the tusks could start to be. I remember we slaughtered one that we had let to get about 3, and when I looked at his mouth, I actually cut my finger on his tusk.
Oh, wow.
And you could barely see it, but it was starting to come underneath his upper lip. It was sharp as a knife, the little crease on his tusk. So the age, I think you don't want to let you should probably never have a pig that gets more than 4 or 5 years old. Same rule with a chicken. Chickens don't really do that well when they get 4, 5, 6 years old. Mm-hmm. So that's your culling time. But that's one thing that I can think of. And I don't have a lot of experience with a lot of these other industrial breeds, but I would suspect that if you're looking at a breed that has been seriously industrialized, you may have a lot of the same problems that I was talking about earlier. So I would say, yeah, definitely look twice when you're looking at one of those really large industrial breeds.
So, Devon, we've had you on before, but once again, you are the author of The Crumble, and I know you have another book coming out. When is that book due out?
I do have a sequel to After the Crumble that is going to be coming out in the fall. And, of course, shameless plug, it's www.afterthecrumble.com and facebook.com/afterthecrumble. You can keep up to date with, all the Crumble-related news and how we're doing on the sequel. So that will be, and I hope to be talking to you again in maybe January, February, talk about, how the sequel's doing and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Devon, man, as always, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to our follow-up conversation in January, February.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Show notes for this episode, links to books mentioned, links to today's guest, Devon, and other cool resources can be found at intherabbithole.com/E184. Consider helping the show pay its bills and get some awesome membership benefits. Visit itrh.net to become part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. This show is solely supported by listeners just like you. Again, that's itrh.net. Do it today to help keep the show safe and sound, which keeps you safe and sound. With that, we wrap up episode number 184 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.